Hello, everyone. Welcome to season 2 of That's My God with Cassandra Grace. I'm Cassandra. Man, I wish I could tell you I had a great plan for opening episode because that's what a responsible podcaster does. And when I first planned out, we're going to have season 2, this is what it's going to be about, I was so excited about it. I was like, no problem. I'm going to want to write this whole season and just be so excited about it. And I still am very excited about it, don't get me wrong. It's just as the day has approached for me to actually record, I have gotten more and more, I don't even know if nervous is the right word, but that's the only word I can think of, to describe this feeling of I want to do the podcast. I don't want the responsibility that I know this season is going to come with. First season, we were just kind of vibing together, talking about how cool God is and what he was doing in my life and how he's just speaking through his word still today. Cool. That's kind of easy to do, though. We got deep at some points, but we're going to dive a lot deeper this season, and I'm really excited for it. I'm also a little bit like, oh boy, I haven't been super serious like this in a hot minute. Now, don't get it twisted. This is still going to be the chaotic, oddly phrased podcast you have come to know and love. But we're talking about passages this season that the church generally avoids, all right? There's some churches that are exceptions to the rule. My current church is actually one of them. It was so cool. As I was starting to plan out which passages I wanted to talk about this season, my pastor started preaching on 2 of them in the same sermon. And I was like, whoa, this is so cool. So it was awesome. It was just kind of like a nod from God. I felt that was just like, yes, this is what I want you to be talking about. Anyway, what are we talking about? I'm glad you asked. Let me finally tell you. We're going over the passages that churches generally avoid because, and every church has its own reasons, and some of them I get, and some of them I'm like, come on, guys. They're not the most family-friendly passages in the Bible. If you've ever read the Bible yourself, this is kind of like rated R, actually, because it's about real life. It's not just like the clean, wholesome Christian life that you should aspire to have. It's like, no, life is messy and sin exists and evil is real. And how do we live according to like what God wants for us and desires for us in a world that is so messed up? And so I want us to talk about some of those passages that are super messy and super messed up, where you read it and you just blink afterwards and you're like, that was so whack. I don't even know what to do with that. Why is that in here? I want to talk about those passages. So we're going to be talking a lot about Genesis. Genesis is messed up, okay? We're going to talk about Judges. Judges is like the bleakest. Oh, geez. It's so bad in Judges, okay? And then we might talk about Song of Songs. I don't know. We might. Or we might save it for another season. I don't know. We might talk about that one. Anyway. Oh, another disclaimer I should give. These aren't the most family-friendly passages. So if you tend to listen to podcasts with your young children around, this might be one you want to do when they're not around. Just because some of our conversations, I'm not going to beat around the bush when I'm talking about the things I'm talking about, okay? If it's in the Bible, we're going to talk about it as it is, a podcast for the mature in the room, okay? So, my beef isn't, hey, why are we not talking about these passages in church? Because if you have a church where the children don't go have Sunday school during the main service, then it makes sense why you wouldn't talk about the raping of Dinah from the pulpit, okay? But if you're in an all-adult Sunday school or even like young adult high school, I think we can start talking about these things. If you're in a situation where the audience is right and someone says, hey, can you explain this passage to me? Like, why are we reading about this guy sleeping with his daughter-in-law and then like trying to cover it up. Like, what is going on here in the middle of this story about Joseph and what his brothers did to him? Like, this feels so random, and I don't want to know why we need to know about this, because it's like really disturbing, and like, what is the whole point of that? Like, can we answer those questions? Or are we just going to say, oh no, we always skip that chapter when we talk about the story of Joseph and his rags to riches, God redeeming story? We skip this part that God redeemed because it's too messy, it's too confusing, and we don't want to touch it because it's awkward, even though, you know, it's in there for a reason and we're all adults here. We don't want to talk about it. We don't want to get into it. Don't worry about it. Blah, 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 blah. Like, we need to talk about it. We need to talk about these things, because when we don't, here's what we tend to do as a church. Again, generalization. We tend to take really great Bible stories that have great impact and meaning for our lives today, but we sanitize them because we don't want to talk about the nitty gritty and like the uncomfortable parts. And so we just like leave things out. So we teach kids about Samson, and then like every kid wants to grow up and be strong like Samson. If you've read Judges, you know Samson was a hot mess, okay? Do not tell your children to grow up and be like Samson. I'm straight up, don't do it. Don't do it. He was a disaster. All right, similar story from my own life. Gideon, he was another judge. He was a judge in Israel. He must be a great guy, I said to myself. So, you know, I know he did some tests with fleece and whatnot, and that's pretty cool. And so anyway, I'm graduated college. I'm like 22, meeting with my pastor about this thing I'm trying to make a decision about in my life. And so I said, oh, so I like tested God. I was like, I'm like Gideon. And he said, Cassandra, stop it right now. Like, that story about Gideon, he was testing God. Like, do you hear what you're saying? Like, you're not supposed to test God. Gideon is not the role model in this story. And I was like, interesting. No one ever taught me that. Yeah, so I'm just saying, like, the biblical literacy is not good. It's not good. That's why we need to talk about these things. These are also the passages that people who don't believe in God will point to, and they'll be like, this happened in your Bible, so, like, how is this a God you want to believe in and you want to follow, and what is wrong with you as a person that your holy book contains such evil things? And I want to help us understand, like, why does our holy book contain such unholy moments and passages? And it's because we live in an unholy world. We live in a fallen world with so much evil, and God is like, hey, I'm preparing you for real life. Like, I understand what real life looks like. I'm not asking you to do anything that you're not capable of doing in the situations that you're actually living in. So, my hope and my prayer for this season is just that you would see, like, how generous God is towards us, that no one is beyond his saving, no one is beyond his redemption. I want you to see these stories of messed up people who you're like, you're a sick human being. And then I want us to see how God actually, like, used that for the ultimate good, and how we can take those moments and look at them in our own lives and be like, okay, I'm a sick human being and God still loves me, and awful things have happened to me, but God can still bring good out of it. That doesn't mean that awful thing was a good thing, but it means that God doesn't waste any of my experiences. Like, he loves me fully and completely, and nothing is wasted with him. And so that's what this season is going to be. So I'm excited. Hopefully you are. So I'm not going to get into, like, specific stories today, but don't worry, we will. Today is just my plug to say, hey, read the Bible on your own, and also read the Old Testament. If you are like, oh, the Bible is so boring, like, why do I care about these things that happened thousands of years ago? Listen, the Old Testament has hot goss. If you like trash reality TV, that is the Old Testament in a nutshell. Like, it's a train wreck. You cannot look away. It's Hot Mess Express. Truly, with so much love. Like, these people did not have it together, and you have a front row seat when you read the Bible. What's great about this, though, that makes it even better, is that it's setting up what God is going to do for all of time. redeem and redeem and redeem and save and heal and restore. Like, it's so cool. Man, you're in for a wild ride, chapter after chapter. I remember the first time I read Genesis last year. No, it wasn't the first time I read Genesis. When I was reading through Genesis last year, after every chapter, I just had to, like, take a deep breath and go, what just happened? What are we doing, people? Yeah, and when you're reading Genesis with the mindset of, God, please show me something about who you are in this passage, and then you read about these guys killing every man in the town to get revenge for what happened to their sister, and you're like, that's super epic, but I feel like I'm not supposed to think it's super epic, even though I 100% think that's the most epic thing to ever happen. You learn some interesting things about who God is. Yeah. Also, the Old Testament sets up so much crazy cool stuff that happens in the New Testament, which shouldn't be surprising. Jesus came to fulfill the law, and the law is given to us in the Old Testament. So it makes sense that, you know, Jesus existing on earth as a human in the New Testament would directly relate to what happens in the Old Testament. But actually, like, getting to read about it and see how, oh, this thing that God said here in Deuteronomy completely shaped the culture that Jesus was living in and trying to reshape in his time in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. It's kind of like if you were to read a book that had a very important prologue and you just skipped the prologue and read the book, and then you were like, I don't understand why this is happening. I don't understand who these people are and why they think this way. And it's like, well, did you read the prologue that explained all of those things? And you're like, no, I never read the prologue. Prologues are boring. Well, that's why you're lost. Because you thought you didn't need the information that the author knew you needed to appreciate the full story. Do you get it? Do you get it? The context matters. Also, just a side note, please read the prologue in books. What on earth are you people doing? Anyway. Yeah, it all relates. And it's easy to think like, oh, I'll just skip the boring ones like Leviticus and just read 1 Samuel about David. But the rules and the context of Leviticus directly feed into Judges, which is like no one is doing what God told them to be doing in Leviticus. Like every man did what was right in his own eyes. Hot mess, disaster. And so then we're going from that kind of culture into David being appointed as king, Saul being the king at the time that David's appointed king, and it's like all of these things relate to each other. They directly come out of each other, and if you just skip those things, then you can't appreciate the fullness of the story. And so biblical literacy matters because it helps us understand how sovereign God truly is and how much he truly has everything under control. Because I think it's so easy for us, we kind of talked about this in the last episode of season 1, to look at like everything that's going on in our lives and be like, what is God doing? Like, how could he let this happen? My life is in shambles and now I'm doubting the goodness of God. And if we only think of, you know, the good stories of like David defeated Goliath and Samson was a strong guy and, you know, Jonah, he went to Nineveh after all, and like that's all we know about those stories, then it's easy for us to be like, oh, how is God gonna meet me in my need, in my struggle, in this time when I'm oppressed or whatever it may be. But when we know, oh, the full context of the story, like David was running for his life for a long time before he actually became king. And Samson died, like had his eyes gouged out and all of these awful things because he was also dumb, okay? Jonah, he ran from God, absolutely disobeyed him, and then even when he finally obeyed God, he was still super bitter about it, and we never see if he came around to appreciate compassion and redemption, or if he just was spiteful about that part of God's character for the rest of his life. You know, like it's those parts of the Bible that we need in order to get through the hard parts of life. I think that's also why a lot of people turn away. I mean, obviously there's church hurt and whatnot, but I think like some people just think the Bible isn't relatable. Like it has nothing to offer me in my real life. And it's like, okay, did anyone ever teach you the gritty parts of the Bible, the parts that show how to handle the hard parts of life? Or did they just tell you Mary had a baby in a stable and it was beautiful and that's it? She didn't have to like risk her entire social standing and give up the life she always thought she was going to have. Yeah. I just think we need to do some justice to God's ability to be good through the hard parts of life. Do I sound like a broken record yet? That's what we're going to be talking about this season. I'm really excited. I hope you're excited. If you're like, how do I prepare? How do I prepare for this season? Look, we're still doing episodes every 2 weeks. So you have 2 weeks. Just read Genesis. Okay? You probably know Genesis 1 through 6, 1 through 8, even pretty well. Okay? Days of creation, Cain and Abel, Noah and the flood. You probably know all that pretty well. Okay, once we get to like Abraham and Isaac and Lot and everything that's going on there, that's when things get like super messy. And what are we doing here, people? Like, is it really that hard to like do the right thing? And the answer is yes. It is. It is. But this is good news for us because we are so bad at doing the right thing and God redeems it. God still cares for us. God will still use our lives to further the gospel and bring salvation. So that's cool. And that's why we care. Anyway, yeah, so read Genesis if you want to get ahead of the game. If you want to say, I don't know. I don't really know. I've never experienced like sitting down and reading the Bible and being like shocked to my core of what was in there. Just start reading. Just start reading Genesis. Like get halfway through Genesis, start reading, and your jaw will be on the floor, and you'll be like, God, what is this? And then we'll talk about it in episode 2. Yeah. So thanks for coming along for the ride. I hope again that this season is encouraging to you. It'll just be in a slightly different way than season 1 was, and I'm excited for the conversations that this might spark, whether they're with me or within your own church community, small group, best friend, whatever. Let's talk about what's in the Bible, even the stuff that's whack. Because the Bible is, what is it? What do I say? Because God is the coolest and the Bible actually slaps. And I think, if we're Christians, we should, believe that like the book God wrote for us is a good one. I'm gonna go. Have a wonderful next 2 weeks, and I'll see you later with some tea, Bible tea, that's gonna teach you about how much God loves you. All right. Bye, guys.